Hey, well, it's fun to be here today with Whitney Visser, who is an Enneagram coach. Turns out I know Whitney pretty well. Also, she's my daughter. So that makes this a lot of fun to do together. So, welcome, Whitney.
Hi, thanks. This is really fun that you're inviting me into this for sure.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
So we have a bunch of people who are looking at this who have taken an Enneagram test and they've got the results in their hand. They've read over them, but for most of us, Enneagram is something that's not super familiar. Maybe we've heard a little bit about it. Maybe we've gotten a little bit of even familiarity with it on the numbers, or you're a 9 or you're a 2 or something like that. But I invited you because I wanted a professional, a certified coach to walk with us and help us understand the results of the tests that we got. So maybe just let's begin there and have you kind of start with where did the Enneagram come from, and then kind of lead us through the results, if you would. So go ahead. I'm gonna I'm
Sounds
gonna
good.
open your screen if I can.
The presentation, great.
Yeah, there you go.
Um, yeah, so a lot of us have taken different personality tests, I'm sure, at some point in our career or in our personal lives. There's DISC, there's Myers-Briggs, there's lots of different things. What I love about the Enneagram is it's not just one company putting something out there that makes it kind of feel like this is it, this is who you are, this is how you behave, or this is what your strengths are. It is what it is. What I love about the Enneagram is it's more of a philosophy than anything. It was more of an oral tradition passed on through different decades and even centuries, some say, and then was brought into the US in the 50s or 60s. And a bunch of different psychologists or philosophers or different authors took it and ran with it and started publishing books. And so if you're to look online or on social media, you'll see this idea that there's 9 types of people, and yet a lot of different sources have different names for each of the different types. And that's because, again, it's not just one company putting something out there. It's more of a philosophy that people have taken and added and expanded because it's a really dynamic tool. The idea is that we have access to all 9 types within us, and we have a different relationship with each of these core types. But different than it being just about behavior or temperament or strength, let's say, it really gets to the motivation behind why we are motivated, or how we're motivated to operate in the world. And the test that you all took was by Wagner, who's a psychologist. That's who I studied under and was certified through his program. And I like that he names each one by the values that they're trying to offer. So you have the 1 who's going for goodness, the 2 who's going for love, the 3 who's going for effectiveness. And we'll get into each of these types in how we are at our best and how we are when we're at our average levels, and when we're struggling as well, whether that's because of stress or because of conflict or life circumstance, or maybe we just haven't done a lot of self-reflection or self-awareness work. So it's a dynamic tool in that we can grow into different parts of who we are, different strengths. And yet the idea is we have this core type throughout our life. But you'll see in your own tests as well, you'll also resonate with various other types as well. So I'm thinking,
I
yeah,
think
do you
that's
have any
one of the things
questions?
I'm going to take just say that I think that's one of the things I've learned about Enneagram over the last few months is that, and I call it a personality type just because in HR we
Sure.
call everything a personality type, but it really is and you said it's really your core motivation for why we do what we do, why we act the way we do, why we react
Mhm.
the way we do, right? And that's the typecast, I think, is what it's called.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, any of us could be doing the same job even, or doing the same behavior in a given room, but the idea is that we're driven to the why by these 9 different reasons in a way. So I'll kind of jump into how the shape works, and then we'll go through a little bit of bird's eye view of each of the types. Not trying to get us to memorize it all today. It can kind of be a little bit overwhelming, but it helps to just hear a little glimpse, see a little glimpse at each of these types, because we probably have most of these people that we interact with, different types. And then you'll start to see, oh, I resonate more with this one, maybe a few of these others, and not at all with some. Totally okay and totally normal. So the Enneagram can be divided into 3 triads. 2, 3s, and 4s are considered to be on the heart or feeling triad. 5, 6s, and 7s are considered to be on the head or the thinking triad, and 8, 9s, and 1s are on the gut or sensing triad. And that's mostly just where we lean. Of course, we all think and feel and react, but it's how we lean when we're making decisions a lot of times. So if I were to ask someone on the head or thinking triad, "Hey, how are you feeling today?" They might give me an answer like, I don't know. I have to think about how I feel right now because I'm, more in my head." Or if I were to ask a 2, 3, and 4, "What do you think about this idea? Let's go for it." And they might take a second to gather their thoughts. So that can help when you're thinking about how you interact with others, and then it can help when you're working on a team or when you're managing people to know where they're coming from in that. You'll see language in all different circles about there being a wing for each of the type, and that's just the number adjacent. So a 2 is either going to have a 1 or a 3 wing. A 3 is going to have a 2 or a 4 wing, and that's just the way that that type is expressed. It can mean they're more extroverted or introverted versions of that type. And so a lot of people ask, what is the wing? Does it matter? It will matter for you based on how strongly you resonate with that other adjacent number, and we'll get into your percentages later. Also, you see the lines interacting or intersecting around the diagram, and that tells us which direction each of our core types move when we are in stress or when we are feeling um, relaxed. So the idea is we have this core type, and then some of us handle stress differently than others, of course, but when we're under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, our number can kind of take on the lower side, usually a tendency to take on the lower side of a different number. And then when we're feeling like, okay, I have everything we need, I'm feeling in a good place, we can start to move towards the high side of a different number. So we'll get into, again, more of what that looks like for you specifically given your test. But that's just kind of a little bit to explain the different lines between those. Any thoughts before we go in, diving into each of the types?
No, I think that will all make more sense once I kind of think of myself as a number and then kind of see how it relates to the numbers around me, whether it's thinking, a gut, or feeling. So yeah, look forward to
Yes,
that.
agreed. All right, well, let's jump into each of these types. Again, so Wagner, you took the Wagner Enneagram personality skills, and he goes by each of the numbers being a value they're going for. We'll come back to that language. But as I am sharing, I'll give you some of the language that other Enneagram thinkers and other ways you'll see each of these types described. For example, up top, you'll have the 3 different names that this number might be called. You'll also see a list of adjectives that are commonly related with this type, our core desire and our core fears, and then how we're motivated and what we have the potential for in each of these types. So I would just encourage you as you're reading this to kind of maybe put some faces with some names here or some faces with each type. Oh, think about people in your life, whether it's people you work with or people you're in personal relationship with, to say, oh, that kind of reminds me of so and so. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, this reminds me partly of me sometimes, but maybe not always. Um, every type has something we're trying to go for, and kind of trying to offer the world something we're driven by. And then on the flip side of that, when we get really consumed with I have to be this person, we kind of have this other side that comes out, or our avoidance area. And I'll talk a little bit about what each of those are for the types as well. So our ones are on the gut or sensing triad. Ones are considered to the reformers or the perfectionists. Ones are really going for goodness in everything that they do. So they can walk into a room or a meeting and just have a sense of how something could be improved to be done the better or the right way. In a personal sense, I think of this as someone who has a right way of cleaning the kitchen or a right way of putting the dishes together, and they'll kind of like die on that hill, like, no, this is how it's done. There's no other way. So in a kind of a tame sense, that's kind of how that can play out. And then, of course, in a bigger sense, it's because the one is really holds themselves to a high standard and also holds others to a high standard. So on the average or maybe unhealthy sides of this, a one who's really stressed can get really critical of themselves and others. And then when a one is able to kind of have some balance, or say, I don't have to be right, or die on that hill every time, the one can relax into this place of serenity and of saying, I might have an idea of how this could go better, but I'm going to bring a lightheartedness to this as well. But on a team or in leadership, have the potential for being the person to know the next best action to take to kind of make the vision come to life. They're the ones that dot the I's and cross the T's, detail oriented and productivity, future thinking oriented types.
So let me
Moving
ask you a
on.
question there,
Oh,
and then let me go back just a second. And that most of the people looking at this, sitting around watching this video, are in some means of a transition, right? Transition from working full time to something else. They might be in another type of a life transition. Hit a little bit, and we don't have to do this for each one, but hit a little bit on this one. How's the one going to be handling their transition? How would you expect a one to handle their transition, both on the healthy side and unhealthy side?
sure. Well, all different types have a different relationship with work in general, whether we're the kind of like work to live or live to work types. The ones in my life that I know are really hard workers, and um, work is a place that they feel competent and they feel really fulfilled in that. So there could be some vulnerabilities thinking about life without the normal, maybe day to day or past work that they've done, but also they're forward thinking, planning oriented types. So they probably have already been thinking about this. They probably already have some things in place as to what life after the normal 9 to 5 or whatever that looks like for that person could be. So I would say a mix of it's going to feel vulnerable and a change of pace, and you probably already have some ideas of how it's going to also feel productive. One's want to make sure they're feeling um, productive and that they're contributing goodness to the world. So that can transition great into the next chapter of life as well.
Yeah, I think in particular your word here, purposeful, right? I mean, one of the things that we've got as our tagline, live with purpose. And one of the things that people struggle with is in this transition that I've had this purpose of waking up every day to go to work. I've had this reason to get up every day to go work, and no matter what the job is. And then when that goes away, our challenge is to redefine our purpose and
Mhm.
to rediscover sometimes, maybe not even rediscover, but to discover a new purpose, take what worked well in the past to use what works well in the future. And so, yeah, I would think a one with such a focus on purpose could struggle maybe a little more than most as they transition to not having a controlled environment and a defined purpose.
Sure. I would say the work for the one always throughout life, but especially in this season, is not being too hard on themselves. That drive has gotten them to where they are today, and the work of that is to say, I might not. This might feel different, and it might not feel like I'm doing it the best way possible, but it's okay to go easy on yourself in those big transitions and to experiment with different things and to try on different lifestyles, even of figuring it out until you kind of land in that place where it feels both purposeful and um, restful as well. That's something ones have to work at too, is carving in rest for themselves so that they can enjoy the life that they've built for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
hmm Let's move on to the two. So the twos in the heart triad, twos are very others oriented. They're very heart triad, meaning that we're connected to our feelings. Twos specifically are more connected to others' feelings than their own. Sometimes it's hard for twos because they're so oriented and giving and generous. It's hard for them to really dig into what I need and what is it that I want. Twos that have done a lot of work around that, around boundaries, around knowing when to say no so that they can say yes to the things that they really care about. Those twos are, we know them as great leaders. They're hard workers. They bring others along with them when they're starting an initiative or starting something new in life. They truly desire to be loved in return. And they're the kind, on a personal level, they're the kind of person that can anticipate what it is that you need or want, maybe even before you do, whether it's your favorite snack or whether it's, they kind of guess how you're feeling or what you might want to do in a given day, or again, in a work setting, in a project or whatnot. I think it's a good filter to think through. So what would this look like for a person that's again transitioning in a different into a different chapter of life? And I think we'll learn about nines as well with this, or sevens as well, where we're kind of looking around at what are others doing. It can be a really hard thing for a two to just almost like quiet that noise or whatever's happening in social media or what you're seeing your friends do or whatnot, and say, what is it that I really want this next chapter to look like? Because when a two can get connected with that, again, we're not really worried about twos not having a purpose as far as finding those relational things to be involved in. But I think it can be hard for a two to connect with it themselves, if that makes sense. Anything else you'd add or want to know
Yeah,
about the
no, I
two?
agree. And I would think too, a two might really enjoy this transition, that maybe they've been in a role or a job or something where it's been about performance or
Mm,
production or something like that. And now they get a chance to really to maybe step more into this motivation to help people. And that's why I think you see a lot of business people transition to some kind of a nonprofit, or want to anyway. They think, I want to
mm-hmm.
transition to doing something that's got more purpose. And so I think this would be a time maybe to take the shackles off for someone that's a two, and go, God, where do I really want to be used? How do I really want to take these gifts and these motivations to my next season?
Definitely. Well, and I'd also say too, twos can like overdo all of that for themselves. They can overcommit to different nonprofits or the giving. That's where what they find easy to do. So the work for the two is to get selfish. And I know that's kind of a cringe thing for them to think of, like, oh no, but I'm not selfish. I don't want to be selfish. I would say when a two is even cracking the door open a tiny bit into indulgence, or into like, what is it you want, like what feels good to you, that's actually a great path for them to be on, where they can find some self-expression or some creativity. That's a great path for a two to move into, even if it feels like I have to be about others. It keeps their otherness balanced when it's something that they enjoy themselves as well. All right, going on to our threes. Um, Threes are known as the effective ones, the achievers, the performers. They are success oriented. Threes are the ones that can get the job done. If you give them a task, they'll, before they even hear probably what the full detail explanation of what is needed, they'll be off and running with it. They're self starters, and they're have a high threshold for stress, for work. They can handle a lot. They're doers. So the work for a three, the inner work I'm talking about when I say the inner work for a three is to get in touch with the authentic self and have that line up with what the projected sense of self is. Similar to twos, they're aware of what others want and need, but the three, the objective is, I want to do this well, and I want to do it right, and I kind of want to win. So these are our very goal oriented types. My guess, in the transitional chapter of moving from full-time work to maybe retired or purpose vocational afterwards, they probably already have a list of bucket list kind of things, of things they want to accomplish. And as leaders, I think they're really good drivers of getting everyone else as well to check to meet their goals. So that's a big transition to go from, if they've been in a leadership position, which a lot of threes end up in leadership positions because they're confident, competent, sociable. It can be a transition to going, okay, yes, to continuing to achieve and have purpose in this next chapter. But I would say the vulnerability, it comes from, okay, this might not feel as productive as being in the workforce. So how do we find enough productivity that makes you feel comfortable, and yet kind of tapping into that more, like, it's okay that we're entering into a chapter of more rest and more relationship and maybe some inner reflection and inner growth there. And that will help that
Hmm.
three be more balanced in this next chapter of their life.
Yeah, when you led the executive team at the company that I work for last year, it was interesting to see. We had a lot of us who scored high in three, and yet there were still very successful people in leadership roles who weren't a three. They were other
Mhm.
types of roles, and they used that motivation, that skill, also to have their part of the contribution. But yeah, it seems like my experience has been we do see a lot of what you call CEOs or leaders or successful people fall into three because they are high achievers. And again, as we think about the transition, how is that motivation need to just be reflected on as they go into this next season? That's great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. Um, Moving on to fours. Fours are also in that heart triad. Fours like doing things differently, like thinking outside the box, like to romanticize the different ideas for life or the different kinds of lifestyles out there. They're really in touch with their own high highs and low lows of emotion, and they can handle sitting with others in those heights and depths of emotion. They want to feel like they're making and creating significance in life, and they avoid that feeling of the mundane or the day to day. They're introspective and reflective, but they have I imagine a four in that transition probably again has some ideas of what they would like life to look like in this next chapter. I think the work for the four is not to overly romanticize whatever that looks like, because sometimes when we overly romanticize something, there's kind of the disappointment afterwards of the reality. So when a four can step into, here's the practicality and the reality of things, here's going to be my structure, here's what I want to be kind of disciplined at, that kind of can help bring structure to the daydream of things, or to the emotionality, or to the, those deeper authentic connections and relationships, the nebulous. The fours can hang out in the nebulous pretty easily. So a four, I would say the work for them in kind of that next chapter would be probably to have other people in their life who they trust to say, okay, what is it? What's that kind of structure that I'm going to need in order to be able to live out of my creative self as well in a practical, sustainable way. Any
Yeah,
other thoughts here?
interesting. No, it was interesting as you did again the executive team, and on two different groups did the executive team and the IT team. I don't think anyone scored very high on four, which is probably not unusual in industry and business. But I think personally, lots of people who have some sort of personal interest or sort of their bougie side of their life, even though they're in industry, might show up. As they think
Yeah.
about the transition, hey, I get to be more like I really am, as opposed to more
Hmm.
like I think people have wanted me to be or have needed to be in my
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, I would say American work culture definitely rewards the 3 or the 8 or the 1, there's a practicality, a high level of productivity, a high level of structure and performance, and 4 to some degree is some of the antithesis of wanting to do something really different, probably not in the 9 to 5 realm of things. They probably have already had some more of a vocation than a traditional sense of, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see from your groups if there are those that connect with the four. And I'm a four, so I'm happy to talk. I'd actually love to talk with anyone who's in the
I'm sure,
later
sure you
career
would.
with that. One of my mentors, who was in teaching and also an artist, was a four and is a four. And it's been really neat to see her transition into, it's, she doesn't think of herself as not working, right? There's still this creative element, and she still has some income coming in, but like you were saying, it's like, oh, this is the time I get to really be me and not have to kind of fit
Yeah,
into a box. So yeah.
yeah.
All right. Moving on to the fives. Fives are the more cerebral types. We're now onto the head or the thinking triad. The investigator, the thinker, fives really want to understand life and want to have as much knowledge as they can about the things that they're interested in. If you were to sit and have a conversation with a five on something that they find to be interesting, or maybe it's a hobby they're involved in, or they're line of work, are probably experts at whatever that is. It can feel really vulnerable on the other side of things for a five to be in a place where they don't understand or where they don't have a lot of handholds. Fives don't like feeling helpless or without support and guidance, and they need a lot of information in order to make decisions. Um, they are really good at, in a setting like you were saying, I think on your team, some of those other numbers in leadership were more of the fives balancing out the threes and the eights, who are the go go go. The fives are kind of like, hold on, let's kind of get the full picture of the information, similar to sixes, which we'll get to as well. A five can be a really amazing visionary and can be very relational, but definitely needs that withdrawal time to recharge. um, to the extent that sometimes fives can get isolated off into their own hermit world. That sounds like really nice for a five, of like, I just want to close off the world and sit with the beauty of my thoughts and these ideas and my learning. So for a five, I could see the next chapter of life feeling daunting, in that maybe work felt like a comfort zone for some, or maybe they're really ready to be not in that world. But I could see fives feeling vulnerable around not totally knowing how it's going to play out. What does purpose look like? I don't maybe we're looking around for other examples of who's done it well, and sometimes that's hard to find. I think all of us are, depending on different chapters of life, we are looking around for like, who's doing this well and how can I learn from them. So fives are going to want those resources, want these kind of workshops, want books to read on who's doing it well and how do I get there as well.
Yeah, I think I've worked around fives. Some of our management team scored high on this, and they are super knowledgeable. They are super wise. They are big thinkers, and I know in my personality type, or in my number, my motivation, this is not I could almost be the opposite of this. I don't need the information. I'm so. I think I'm in the thinking same triad, and yet I kind of react a little more quickly instead of worried about the facts and the information.
Mm,
But I would think that a five might struggle in part in this transition because I need more information. What's that job going to look like? What's that time going to look like? What do I do with all this? And so more and more information, and struggling to kind of make that call on
hmm.
what's next, make that decision. Worked with some folks who've been fives who they just got so hung up in that I need more and more data, more and more decision. I need to look at this five different ways, that people waited on them for especially when they're in a place of we need to hear back from them. We need their decision. Super frustrating can be in that work environment to always be waiting on them to get the next piece of information, to look at it from all sides before a decision can be made. But yet I also value, I need a five alongside me at all times, because they just have more focus on the detail than I do.
Well, and I would say for fives, that the clients that I've worked with that are fives that are doing some of that inner work, or have maybe done some therapy, or are getting in touch with putting some words, putting some language to what they feel, because fives are on that head triad. And if they get too caught up in the thought process, they can make themselves dizzy. They can think themselves in and out of anything. But the fives I know who have said, I need to tap into the heart center and learn from that, and acknowledge like, oh, I have fears here, or I feel vulnerable here. Those fives don't get stuck in that place. They're able to go, oh, like, I know what it means to be competent, and I know I need to reach out for help if I need it. And it's a really cool, that really brings a lot of balance to fives, to do any kind of work around how we do emotions. How can I sit in those emotions instead of just go into my head? All right, moving on to the sixes. Sixes are in the middle of the head triad, so similar to fives in that they probably need a good amount of information to make a decision. It's usually because sixes do have a sense of what the duty or the responsibility is, or what's going to be the best decision to keep us all safe and well. Sixes really desire that, to be with security and support. They're loyal to, especially if they have an authority figure, whether that's a boss or whether that's a partnership that they really trust. They're very, very loyal to those around them, and they avoid feelings of risk or deviance. So they're motivated by having that reassurance and by working as a consensus, whether that's with the group, team, work team, or family. And sixes have to work to really trust themselves. So even though they're in the middle of the head or thinking triad, they have an interesting relationship where they don't always trust their own thoughts. They'd rather say, I don't know, what do you think? Tell me what to do. So when a six is able to kind of get self connected to, okay, here's what I believe I need to be prepared or what I need to feel safe, now I can move into taking the next best action step. So I imagine a six in career transition and going on to potential retirement or the next phase of life might have a lot of those fears. Maybe they've delayed retirement or delayed leaving their job because it feels so daunting to make that big of a change. When I work one on one with sixes, a lot of times we're talking around what's going on in your family, in your circle around you that you feel really probably connected to, and then where is fear helping us? Like, where is it showing us, yeah, here's how things could go wrong? And where is it hindering us from making the next best decision and believing that just taking the risk that it sometimes we don't make their best decision. We got to try something else. Um, they have to sometimes be partnered with other types who can give them support in what feels like a vulnerable space of big change. But when they're able to tap into, empathy for themselves of, yeah, this is terrifying, like this next chapter of life is daunting, empathizing with themselves in that, and then being able to say, it's going to be scary, but here we go. Sixes are really great at bringing others along with them, and having the support for themselves and offering the support to others.
It's great.
And
Thanks.
moving on to sevens. Sevens are considered the enthusiast, the adventurer. They're going for joy in most of what they do. They want to experience the fullness of life. So they want to feel satisfied by experiencing it all. So these are types that can handle a lot of plate spinning at the same time in a work sense and in a personal life sense. They like a lot of planning, and probably have several trips booked at one time or several, events coming up at one time, and that kind of keeps them motivated to do the day to day, which can feel tedious and harder to sit in kind of the nitty gritty of the grind of the day. Sevens usually stray from feelings of boredom or hard feelings. Well, sevens avoid those, like feeling low or sad specifically. So I imagine a seven in this, and you can speak to this because you're a seven. Um, I imagine other sevens as well being really probably ready for this next transition of um, leaving the workforce into whatever the next thing entails. They probably have a whole bucket list full of things they want to try and experience and make sure they're really getting the most out of life. So I'll let you speak to any more of that as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. I don't know who else scores high on a seven, but I've taken this now 3 times, and each time turns out seven is the highest score by a lot. And so I totally connect with both the things like the desires and the fears that are written here. And so I think as I go into transition, my work and my need is to narrow down, because anything can look fun. The next event, the next social thing, the next vacation, the next whatever. And so my work is to take the breath, to see where gifts and talents and passions lead, and make some decisions, and not just kind of be ready for the very next thing. So
Yeah. Yes, and I'm sure we'll come back to more of that as well. All right, let's hit our last two here. So eights are the challenger, the protector, the powerful one. Eights, you usually know them when they walk in the room. They kind of carry a sense of authority that says, I can take charge if needed. If we're having a hard time making a decision, let's just make it and let's move forward. Let's keep going. Eights are pretty justice oriented in their reasoning behind why they take charge. They're usually looking out for kind of the underdog. Eights are also self-starters, kind of like threes. They are independent in the sense as well that if you give an eight a task to do, they'll say, I've got it, and they'll get it done pretty quickly, usually effective and efficient as well. They're very self-reliant, and show a lot of strength and authority in how they carry themselves. So it's hard for an eight sometimes when someone brings them a lot of fluff around something, or a lot of beating around the bush. They don't like that. They just kind of want you to tell them straight to the point, like, what is it you need? Like, let's just get that done. Eights have to work on how their delivery of how they get things done, or how they ask others to get things done. But when an eight can tap into their own sense of tenderness towards themselves or towards others, they become an incredibly magnanimous leader that's very influential to others. But that's the work of the eight, is to kind of sit in the softening towards themselves mostly, and towards others as well. I
How do you
imagine
see the
in
difference of a 3 and an 8? Those seem pretty similar. What are some distinctive characteristics that might be more like a 3 or an 8?
if a three is high in eight, or an eight is high in three, those are going to look really similar. If someone scores high in either of those, I would look at your other high numbers to see what's kind of balancing that out. Both are quick to the point, want to get things done, doers, and very productive oriented. I would say an eight usually has a sense of power dynamics in the room, not necessarily just to be able to achieve their own goal, but to kind of end up on top in a set of, because it makes them feel safe, and it makes them feel like they can protect whoever or whatever they're trying to protect. So eights are much more protective oriented, where threes are more just concerned with, I just need to hit my goal, and it doesn't have the
Mm,
same necessarily energy around it.
okay,
Does
great.
that kind of
That's
make sense?
helpful. Hmm.
I would say probably similar to sevens and threes. Eights going into the post. Um, are you calling it anything other than retirement?
Yeah,
Like
no,
the
it's
next
just a
chapter,
really
because it could be
next,
really
yep,
different.
next chapter, next season, transitioning from
Yeah.
working full time to something else. Yeah.
I mean, I don't, so eights have a hard time with vulnerability, and they'll kind of deny feelings of vulnerability or weakness. So if you asked an eight, like, how are you doing? Is this daunting for you to go into the next chapter? They'll probably be like, nope, I'm good. I've got it. They kind of put that like strong front up. And yet within there, I think for the eight, their inner work is to say, no, it's okay that this would be kind of vulnerable, and actually a great thing to sit in some of those feelings, because when an eight can give themselves space to rest and reset, that will help them be more kind of relational and take care in a relational sense of those around them, rather than just continuing to drive in the intensity. Because I do think there's something really powerful to pausing and reflecting on this life that you've created for yourself, and feeling the feels and of course I'm the four saying this, but that's a lot of the work that I get to do with people. And I would say on different executive teams too, the eights are finding me to say, how do I do that? How, I want to be there for my kids and my grandkids, and that feels new for me. It feels new to not just go into work mode, but to sit in the relational spaces. So we talk about that being a good path to try out in this next chapter.
I don't know if this has to do with that not wanting to feel the feelings, but it seems that, and this is a very unscientific observation of eights, that I would say most, if not all, of the people that I've said who have kind of challenged the whole Enneagram, I don't want to take it. They got it wrong. I'm not interested in it. Have tended to be eights in their scoring, and I don't know what's behind that. Maybe that's the I don't need it. Maybe that's I just don't want to go there, whatever it is. But it seems that eights have pushed back even on this assessment more than most.
Well, I think I've heard a little bit of that. I would also say it depends. Like I hear that from like fives and sixes who are just more skeptical and like, is this scientific? Should we believe it? Is it prescriptive? No.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think different people have it's just a lot to take in or to go, is this self-fulfilling prophecy or whatnot? But for eights, I think unfortunately they've gotten in like the social media memes on things or learning about an eight, it can feel weird to be like, gosh, I'm not, I don't want to be known as this like power hungry person, which that's not the real truth of it. But eights do kind of end up getting like, it doesn't it's not necessarily a fair portrayal of them in that. So I think I've had eights be like, yeah, okay, I'm an eight. Yeah, can we move along in that? There's a different relationship because of that. And yet I've come to find like, no, there's still there's it's vulnerable for all different types to have to kind of look at how others experience you and how we experience ourselves too. So I think all of us have a different relationship with even what we think about having this conversation about who we are with all these other people, but I do think it can be
Yeah.
specifically hard for eights too.
Fair enough.
All right, we're going to end with our nines who are at the top of the shape of the Enneagram. Nines are considered the peacemaker, the mediator. They're very adaptable, kind of like the twos. They're very others oriented, but different than the two who's going for giving and receiving love. Nines are going for harmony in the group. So they desire to feel calm, cool, and collected within. They will present very calm, cool, and collected in the middle of chaos, in the middle of conflict. It doesn't mean that internally they feel those things, but that's kind of their MO of like, it's fine, we're going to be fine. All of us need a nine or two or three in our lives to help balance us out if we're kind of more of the intense types that are self-expressive in that intensity. Because what nines are going for is harmony and consensus and different. So they're similar to the sixes in going for consensus, but the purpose of it is so that we can be all okay at the end and accepting of others. I think the nines in my life are probably the least judgmental types that I know. They're able to truly and authentically see different perspectives from a lot of people in the room. The work of the nine, the inner work for the nine, is to find themselves, find what it means for them to believe that I matter, what I need matters, what this next chapter looks like for me matters. It's important for me to not just go into whatever you want, but to get really in touch with how do I want to create purpose in this next chapter of life. And so when nines have that security or that sense of comfort and I am okay in who I am, nines can move into that high side of the three where nines say, okay, I'm looking at it's kind of can feel daunting, this next chapter of life or a big change transition. Change can feel daunting. I'm going to sit with what it is I want out of this. I'm going to kind of maybe I would recommend for a nine making a list of what is it that you like to do? What is it you want to do more of in this next chapter? And then what are like really like the next best step, not giant goals to say, I'm going to just go do this right away. But what's like the next step to get there? What's just one next best thing I can do? And when nines have that kind of like, I'm just going to do this little bit each day, they have a amazing relationship with inertia where once something's in motion, they're really consistent with bringing their dreams into fulfillment by doing that kind of next one little thing at a time. So, any thoughts on nines before?
No, that's great. When we tested the IT team, we had several nines, or nine was one of the higher scores, and it's great because they do come into very calming, creating harmony in an environment. People are kind of go, oh, my computer's not working, or I need some help, or whatever it is, and they can come in and just do a great job to calm things and kind of, I got this. And they are not. I found, at least on our team, they don't do conflict very much. I don't know if it's because they're avoiding it or they just don't do it. They're generally nice guys and they pursue harmony. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I really have enjoyed the strengths of a 9 in lots of different areas of life.
Yeah, I would say for those who are threes or eights, sevens, ones even who are kind of the drive types, it's really good to be paired with a 9 relationally in this next chapter. My encouragement to nines and those who are partnered with nines is we do want to hear from the nines. So nines, the encouragement is let your voice be known, like find ways to speak up for what it is that you see and want to happen in this next chapter. And then for those who are really used to sharing and having their opinion known, to take a minute and say to invite others into that, into to invite the nines voice in the room because it's a really powerful and important one for sure.
Right. Let's
Um,
go to the test scoring on that. And I think people like to kind of see that chart that, and if you need to go to a different screen, we can do it kind of where it has the different scores that people are looking at
mhm.
on their test
So I
results. But
just
yeah, this one, perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
again, so here's kind of
Right.
the
Yeah.
layout of all of the
Yeah.
names we just talked about. On your first page of your test results, it says introduction, and there's a little blurb about each of the types. That's kind of a nice
Okay.
cheat sheet to have going into it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you also have a page that looks like this. This is just a random sample. This person is a 5 with a 6 wing, and these arrows are the same for every 5. So it's where a 5 moves when stressed versus when feeling relaxed. If you take a look at your percentile scores, your highest total percentile score is going to be your core type. So for this one, they're a 5, and they score with 75% of what it means to be a 5. Take a moment to look at your second highest score. For this person, that's a 1. Um, Actually, no, this is a 6. Their 1 and their 6 are both really high, but I would say this is a 5 with a very strong 6 wing. So take a minute and take a look at just your total percentile scores. A lot of us have 2 to 3 maybe that are pretty high. And then we have some middle range numbers, and then we have some low numbers. A lot of us have numbers that are under 10%. That just means this is a type that I don't resonate with. It hasn't, I don't feel like it serves me well to be this type, or maybe this type didn't have a chance to show up in my younger years or any point in my life. Or a lot of times, interestingly, our partners or spouses or even close colleagues are that lowest percentile that we have. It's kind of that opposites attract sort of thing where, we find ourselves in this person in the role of being a 5 and strong 6 wing. So when I look at this person's percentile score, I'd say they're very much in that thinking head realm of things. They're very probably analytical, need a lot of information to make decisions. Very low in the 2 and the 4, which is that heart realm. So when I sit with someone, I say, tell me what that means for you. And then they, of course, say, why is my 4 so low? Well, the 4 is very self expressive emotionally, deep into the feels of things. Probably not something that feels super comfortable to you, the 5. Does that resonate? And they say, yes, definitely resonates. So think to yourself about your other high numbers. What was a question I ask a lot of people too is what was going on in your family of origin, like the family that you grew up in? What was going on that probably gave you this role, that made you feel like you need to be this type, whether it's a 7 or a 5 or a 3? Your other high numbers might also have to do with your childhood family culture. Maybe one of your parents is this other high number. Or opposite, maybe your lowest numbers are kind of one or both of your parents and you kind of went totally opposite direction. I think it's a great practice to be reflective as when we're talking about who we are and how we came to be who we are. I don't think we can do it in a complete sense without looking at our first kind of culture and family experience early on. So that can be something you discuss or do some reflection on of how did my family that I grew up with influence who I am today? What values were highlighted versus which values were like not, when you go back to this value realm of things, which values were not applauded or praised. And again, it's not to shame or blame anything. It's just to be able to name it and say, oh, here was the influence, and here's kind of part of why I am the way
So let
I
me
am.
clarify something. So as a 5, so I score, this person scores high on 5. And if you score the highest on 5, that means your wing is either going to be a 4 or a 6, right? And then it's the highest of those two scores. Even if they're pretty low scores, that would still say your wing is the highest of those two scores. Is that correct?
Yes, and if someone's looking at their test and they have really low percentiles on both adjacent numbers, um, I would just say your wing is probably not, like, you don't need to lead with, I'm a 5 with a blank wing. Probably your other highest percentile matters more than your wing.
Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. So look at those. The main thing maybe to look for in terms of where probably what shows up a lot in our life where we connect to would just be the highest of the scores.
Hmm.
Okay.
Next, let's talk about the resourceful, less resourceful. Does that sound good?
Yeah, yeah.
So on this percentile scores, you can see this breakdown of resourceful, less resourceful. Um, let's think of resourceful being the ultimate healthy version of this type, and the less resourceful being when I'm at my worst, or when I think I'm doing the best thing possible, but this kind of avoidance area is coming out quite a lot. So, um, also, before I'm going to go into more detail on the language for resourceful versus less resourceful of each type, but just before I do that, think high side, low side of this, of your number. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and we all live out of both of these things. So for this person, they scored again as a 5. You can see their percentages. They to themselves would say they experience themselves living out of more of the high side of this number, 95% versus 35 less resourceful. That's not necessarily a any kind of data about how others experience them. It's how they perceive their inner world. Maybe they've done a lot of inner work around what it means to be a 5. Maybe in other seasons of their life, they lived out a kind of the unhealthy version, did some work and said, in some inner work, and said, okay, here's what I need to be the best version of what it means to be a 5. So all of us, again, it's not saying, especially I think some of us have more relationship with kind of the shame around, like, oh no, it says I'm less resourceful. That's how you see yourself. So maybe you took the test and you're kind of hard on yourself, and that's not necessarily true of how others experience you. Sometimes that is aligned. Sometimes there's a lot of stress going on in our life that's not bringing out the best in us. So that's just something to think through. I don't get too caught up in the resourceful, less resourceful, again, because I think different circumstances bring a lot of different things out of us.
But if I score,
Here's,
go back to that. I said, let me ask you that thing just on that example. And if I scored, I'm trying to look at this one. Let's not take his 5. But if I scored really high on 8 less resourceful, this guy scored high on 8, or this person scored high on 8 resourceful. I scored really high on less resourceful side. Is that part of would that be a place where I could reflect and maybe do some work around and go, okay, I even see myself kind of showing up in a unhealthy way, if we want to call it that. Is that an area to kind of lean into, would you say?
yeah. And I think the disparity between the numbers matters more. Like, for example, you said eights. Eights are intense types, and the eights and fours are kind of the most intense types energy wise on the diagram. So
Hmm.
on an eights test, it's not uncommon that they have really high numbers, because they're like, yeah, that's me all the time, or no, that's never me over here. So
Mm.
it's how you answer the test. If you said sometimes, 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 versus all the time, it's going to give those numbers different. So it matters. It's, I think each person gets to kind of determine what kind of work they do around that, or how much effort, how much attention they pay to it. I think all of us have to do some of that, but if there's a big disparity, like you see yourself only living out of the unhealthy side, then yeah, I definitely have some questions for that, or that's something we want to look at. But again, we're all kind of doing work on both of these sides of things.
Right.
A lot of it is
Okay.
we just kind of get stuck in our ways too. We don't even know that it's the unhealthy side of things. We think we're doing pretty good, and yeah. So it depends on the person, I'd say. Here's a list of words. These were taken straight from your test. The test maker deemed language, all these words, he kind of just grouped them. It's not a I mean, the grading scale is a spectrum, but resourceful versus less resourceful on the test is just saying, kind of makes it like positive or negative, which we can look at it like that. That's fine. As we see, if we look at twos, positive, supportive, others orienting, the less resourceful side, smothering, need to be loved or love, need to be loved and need to love and be loved. Yes, it can be positive or negative. It's also a spectrum of things, right? So I want to pull up a different website. I'll let you take a minute to just look through your number. Okay, what's the resourceful language, those top two words, versus the less resourceful language? And this is how you answered it, right? Um, but I want to show you more of a spectrum version of this too. So I think I can present. Do you want to take the presentation off? I think I got to go screen share to show you this website. And I would highly recommend you guys to look at the Enneagram Institute. Is a great website, and I'll send it. I can pass along some resources, but they have a really great breakdown of each of these types. And let's just let's go threes to take a peek at it. So kind of gives an overview: basic fear, basic desire, some examples of famous people, some narrative around it. And then down here, you have these levels of development. So on your test, that would be considered the resourceful end of things. The most resourceful version of a type 3 is self-accepting, inner-directed, and authentic. They're true to who they say they are. They're gentle and benevolent. Most of us kind of live, I would say, in these realms. Like a little bit, we have this health, and we also have average that maybe comes out with our families or with our spouses or partners. So as we get down here in this average level, the 3 is concerned with their performance, driving to achieve goals. That doesn't sound negative, right? But it's this driven by terrified of failure. This avoidance area has a lot of energy for this average level person. At their worst, now we get into the less resourceful. This can be under a lot of stress. This can be a 3 that's just in a really bad spot, gets into kind of the more, this is all about me. And then you see some really intense language when you get down to the unhealthy levels. So it'd be an interesting practice for you to, check out this website, and you can do a self-assessment there to say, okay, I relate with these couple words. Oh yeah, back in my 20s, maybe I was down on this unhealthy level, but mostly I'm maybe up here. So again, your resourceful versus less resourceful is picking language out of these healthy levels. It's just not as much of a spectrum on the test as you took. So it can kind of throw people off of, what does this mean?
Yeah, I think, and go back there, sort of, just by either coincidence or by intention, but it has nothing to do with the 9 types. There's 9 levels of
I know
this thing,
that's
but it
confusing.
doesn't necessarily mean that has anything to do with the other 9 numbers that we have in the
Yeah.
Enneagram. Yeah.
So yeah, most of us are not going to be over here, but when you look at, I have people say, I'm going to stop my screen share here. I have people ask, well, what about this, struggling with mental health piece? Well, all of us have a tendency to struggle. Maybe we all have in different chapters of our life with what mental health looks like or whatnot. Does it totally line up with diagnosis? Like, no, not necessarily, but you can kind of read through the different tendencies of, gosh, if I got really wrapped up in really striving to only be this one type and the unhealthy versions of it, without being reflective or in balance, it can kind of take me in this direction. So that's the full spectrum of things as you're looking at what your core type means.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what can we spend a few minutes reflecting on now? What would you tell us to kind of go away and spend a little time doing, thinking, being, feeling right now based on our types? I think you've got some questions there, some reflections.
Yeah. Do you want to pull the presentation back up? It's been an hour, so I would say probably to
Yep.
take a quick break of sorts for those who are
Yep.
been sitting for a while, and maybe you already did up to this point. There's the website I just took you to, enneagraminstitute.com. I think it's helpful for all of us to process what we took in. Maybe some of us zoned out a couple times. That's okay. You have plenty of resources in front of you between the website and your test, but take some time once you come back from a break, stretch out a bit. And we've made this reflection page. There's the test creator is a 5, so it's a total data dump on lots of information. And I would suggest reading through this and kind of creating this consensus page. I think the tendency can be, you have a workshop, you do this personality thing, and then kind of in one ear, out the other. This kind of gets it onto one page of what this means for you and how you can kind of use it as a tool moving forward. So the first section, if you're passing it out, maybe, hopefully you have this in your hands now. One sentence, boil it down to that first page that says what you find easy to do, your core type, that intro page of your wing, your core type, all that. Take a read through it, highlight some things that stand out, and write down just 1 or 2 sentences that really encapsulate what it means for you to be this type. Then on the next page, it talks about avoidance areas and defense maneuvers and how you may have learned this style. There's some pretty heavy language around some of that, so take that with a grain of salt and pull from it what resonates with you. Write down 1 sentence of what you feel you resonate with around your avoidance areas. And then I would think about it in terms of, who have I been in my professional life? How does this play out? How does being this type, and maybe your other high types too, your other high percentages, who can I say that I am in a work environment? And then you can also think, what does this look like for the next chapter? What do I want to bring with me? What are these strengths? How has this type served me well? And then I would definitely do some reflection around what is the work that I have to do based on what this tool is telling me. What's being brought up right now, brought to my attention of, oh, here's a path to growth to keep me more balanced. Something I offer to individuals and to groups is that sometimes a lot of times we're stuck in who we are, and we're used to the ways we grow. Okay, well, I only like doing this kind of thing. I do intellectual things, I read things, but I don't do the feely stuff. Or vice versa. I'm over here in the relational realm of things. I don't like to be analytical or disciplined or those things that feel really structured. That's just an example. So what would it look like for those types of people to just try on something that feels really different? And one way to do this is looking at, I'm going to take it off of the present for a second, is to look at your lowest percentage. And so go back to your percentage page, look at what your lowest one is, and learn about that type. You might be reading that type and say, oh, that's my spouse, or that's someone I've worked with, and like, I never am that person. I'm the opposite of that. In relationships and in work and in personal life, we're always trying to go for homeostasis of balance. And we do that by kind of playing different roles. If you're always the responsible one, then maybe I feel like I need to be the playful one and keep it fun around here. My encouragement in how we use this tool for growth is to say, what would it be like for me to try on this seemingly opposite thing, adjective, personality type? You get to do that. We all get to do that without worrying about it actually changing our fundamental core type. If you're, really productive and goals oriented and you're really good at that, I'm not worried about you all of a sudden not accomplishing your goals. And yet, if you can practice maybe rest, or if you can practice what feels like the antithesis of your strength, it's actually just going to bring balance to who you are. That's going to make your giftedness and your strength not come out of a place of striving, but out of a place of balance and wholeness. And that's the work of the Enneagram, is to say, to learn about these other types and say, what can I borrow? What can I try on, that's going to feel maybe out of my comfort zone, but I can do it believing this is actually going to bring a more whole version of myself. And that kind of takes me out of feeling stuck in my ways, or feeling paralyzed by fear, or feeling like, just this next chapter is daunting. That's okay, that there's a lot of change coming. So where is it that we can borrow from to bring balance and wholeness to who we are as individuals?
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I know I have given on the website, the finishing-strong.org website, have given your link, Sacred Denver, as a resource if people want to have individual coaching on the Enneagram. Whether that's for work, for the transition, or for couples, or for family, for business, whatever it is. I've seen a lot of good with it, and of course have worked with you in a number of environments, which has been great. So thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to more from you in the future. So thanks a lot, Whit.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye.